Polls, polls, and more polls. We're seeing so many polls that soon we're gonna have research that says on the election and leading up to it, we had more poll fatigue than we had pandemic fatigue. It is almost every single hour that we get updates just like this.
There are new numbers on the race for the White House, with a Fox poll showing the president trailing Biden by 8 points now, putting him in a weaker position than he was in 2016, the day before Election Day, especially when it comes to support from some key groups that voted for him the last time.
But folks, do polls matter? Will they fail or succeed this time? And what about a silent Trump vote? Will a silent Trump vote come out and vote Trump into office, just like what happened in 2016 when the polls got it horribly wrong? Well, let's answer these questions now. But first, remember this video is sponsored by life insurance you can get in as little as 5 minutes. You can Apple Pay or Android Pay for it. You don't have to talk to anyone. And of course, get 3 totally free stocks with the stock trading app Webull. Deposit $100, get 3 free stocks worth up to $1,600. So here's the scoop. Textbook polls, very important to clarify. We're talking about textbook polls are very accurate. In fact, they are extremely accurate. In many cases, a truly random sample without bias can accurately predict an election based on as little as 1,000 randomly sampled queries. Unfortunately, life isn't a textbook, and almost every single news agency collects poll data in different and unique ways that can easily introduce bias and require many adjustments and new weightings. For example, CNN and Fox use phone calls, others prefer exit polls, others prefer online surveys, and these polls often struggle with adjusting for things like age, sex, location, education, and other factors to create a representative sample of America. After all, elderly people and college graduates are much more likely to respond to surveys, whereas others are much more likely to hang up, meaning you have to try to scale up and down the different voices when they are surveyed to try to get an accurate representation of America. Unfortunately, all that does is introduce bias and complications. Now, science tries to solve this, but after 2016, based on research today, more than half of Americans do not trust polling. Statistically speaking, polls, when done properly, should be perfect within a few degrees of uncertainty. However, in real life, the Pew Research Group just came out with a new study that tells us some of the realities of polling. Remember when we just played this Fox News poll clip? You see this 2.5% margin, plus or minus here. This is actually really important, and Pew Research gave us a little bit of insight into this. Pew Research says that anytime we see this plus or minus margin, which basically means if, let's say, Biden has a 2 percentage point lead, but the poll could be off by 2.5%, then that means in theory, Trump could also be ahead by 0.5%. Well, Pew tells us that anytime we should see that number, statistically speaking, we should double their margin of error. That means when Fox News tells us they only have a 2.5% margin of error, the margin of error is probably closer to 5%. But even when we consider this, that polls aren't 100% perfect, why do we do them? Why are there so many of them? What is the point, and do they even matter? And what about the silent Trump vote? Let's answer these things. Polling is the oldest form of clickbait that exists in the media. Anything that can attract viewers' eyeballs is money in the pockets of media businesses and universities who conduct these polls and try to accurately make predictions so that way they can attract more advertising dollars by saying, look at the clout we have, we got it right for this many years in a row. They use that clout to attract talent, professors, and get the most dollars coming to their funds. It's a very profitable business, the business of polling. And people want to know what the polls say as up to date as possible. So you have a recurring revenue model in polling. And getting these eyeballs, folks, is delicious for people who invest in the stock market, who want to know every potential move coming up, and newscasters who want to provide up to the minute updates on what's going on with elections or state and local government policies. But again, the problem is we have real issues with the ways polls are conducted. In fact, some companies literally go out of their way to purposefully, in low quality manners, try to get hundreds of thousands of people or tens of thousands of people to respond to their polls just so they can say, we surveyed 50,000 individuals and therefore this person's gonna win. But unfortunately, Pew Research says that polls fail more often than not because they are done poorly. The size of a poll statistically does not matter. What matters is the randomness of the survey and how controls are conducted to prevent bias. Unfortunately, though, preventing bias in the real world is very difficult. And this is why there's more evidence that polling data could actually be more detrimental to voting outcomes than how pollings might actually help themselves. Pew Research says that not only are margin of errors oftentimes wrong by a factor of 2, that is, they're twice as wrong as they think they might be, but Pew Research also says there's a lot of evidence that when polls show a candidate is far in the lead, people are actually less likely to vote. And so as a result, polls could actually have a detrimental effect on the leading candidate, and that might have contributed to why Hillary lost. Less people go out and vote when they think it's going to be a slam dunk election. So then this brings up the question of the silent Trump vote, which Pew Research also looked into. Maybe a silent Trump vote will come out. Less Biden voters will come out because Biden looks like he's in the lead, and a silent Trump vote who refuses to answer surveys or is more likely to hang up on surveys, they end up coming out in troves and vote Trump into a second term of office. Well, Pew Research tells us there's unfortunately little evidence of this. Though they admit that a silent Trump vote could have led to a small margin of error in 2016, they say statistically speaking, there is no silent Trump vote. There is no noticeable silent Trump vote in polling data, and it's unlikely to affect the election. Now, I would venture to say that many of us would disagree with Pew Research, but in fairness to data scientists, if we actually look back at the 2016 polls, research shows that in 2016, the day before the election, Hillary Clinton had a 3.3% lead ahead of Donald Trump. When the votes were counted, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 2.1%, well within any reasonable margins. They were within 1.2 percentage points. Unfortunately for Hillary, Trump won the Electoral College, something that polls are not very good at predicting. So ultimately, do polls matter? Well, here's the thing. The reality is, polls are conducted as snapshots in time. Who would you vote for if the election were held today? Unfortunately, the election isn't being held today. The election is only held on one day every 4 years in terms of the general election. And this is why, when it comes to should we trust polls, the answer is probably not. Could polls be accurate? Because, well, they were accurate in 2016. They just messed up the Electoral College. We just saw the data on that. They tend to be accurate if the controls are proper and we have a random sample of individuals. But do they matter if they end up leading some people to be overconfident who don't end up going to vote? And do they matter when these polls are actually just snapshots of how people are feeling at different points in time, but not on election day? Well, in this case, polls probably aren't going to tell us much of anything. The only way we'll find out who's going to be the president is, well, waiting for tomorrow. Maybe at least. In the meantime, get out and vote. Hopefully you found some of this research helpful, and folks, we'll see you in the next video.